The text came through at 11:47 on a Tuesday night from a number I didn't recognize. Forwarded from a group chat I wasn't supposed to see. Everly's naming ceremony. Saturday, 2 p.m., the Ashford Room at the Meridian. Please don't mention it to M. I read it 4 times before my brain would agree to process it. Everly. Not a coincidence. Not a common name that 2 unrelated people happened to choose. Everly was the name my husband and I picked out 6 years ago, in a hospital room with fluorescent lights too bright for the moment, for a daughter who took 11 breaths and then stopped. I had the birth certificate. I had the tiny plot with her name carved into granite. I had, in the bottom drawer of my home office, a manila folder with a foundation charter I'd filed 2 years ago in her honor. The Everly Grace Foundation, incorporated in the state of Illinois, yen and all, because grief made me do administrative things instead of screaming, and because I am, professionally, the kind of person who turns pain into paperwork. And now some other woman had used that name for her own living, breathing child. A child fathered, I was fairly certain, by my husband. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I sat very still at my kitchen island with my laptop open to a trademark filing I'd been reviewing for a client. And I felt something in my chest go from molten to solid, the way lava does when it hits cold water. Daniel was upstairs. I could hear the shower running, could hear him humming, some tune I didn't recognize, happy in a way he hadn't been happy with me in over a year. I closed the laptop. I opened a new document instead, and I started making a list. People who knew me before all this would tell you I used to cry easily. At movies, at commercials with dogs in them. At my own wedding, when Daniel read vows he'd clearly practiced in the mirror, vows about building a legacy of love with me, about wanting a house full of laughter and little feet. I believed every word. I was 29 and in love, and I had no idea that 4 years later I would be sitting at a kitchen island doing math on a betrayal instead of falling apart. Grief changes you. Mine had changed me into someone who processes catastrophe through structure, because the one time I let myself feel it all the way through, the delivery room, the silence where a cry should have been, the nurse's face, I nearly didn't come back from it. So now, when the ground opens up, I build scaffolding. I did it after Everly died. I built spreadsheets of grief counselors, timelines for maternity leave I no longer needed, a private foundation to make sure her 11 breaths meant something to somebody. I did it at work, where I've spent 12 years as an intellectual property attorney, specializing in trademark and brand protection, telling Fortune 500 companies exactly how far the law will let them go in claiming ownership over a word, a name, a phrase, a legacy. I did it that Tuesday night too. I built a list. The list had 2 columns. On the left, everything I knew for certain. On the right, everything I needed to find out. By 2 a.m., the right column was nearly empty. Daniel had been distant for over a year. I'd chalked it up to grief, to the slow erosion that happens to a marriage after loss, the way some couples come out of it closer and some come out of it strangers who share a mortgage. He worked late. He took calls in the garage. He'd started going to the gym at 5 a.m. A version of himself I didn't recognize showing up leaner, more clipped, more irritated by me every single week. His mother, Carol, had gotten warmer to me in exactly the wrong way. The overcompensating kind of warm, the kind where someone brings you soup because they can't look you in the eye. Carol, who had been more of a mother to me than my own since mine passed when I was 22. Carol, who held my hand at Everly's funeral and told me, "You will survive this, and I will help you." Carol, who apparently also knew about a group chat that said, "Please don't mention it to M. I am the M." By the time the shower shut off upstairs, I had a name, Priya Anand, a brand consultant Daniel's company had brought on 18 months ago, whose Instagram, when I finally let myself look, showed a maternity shoot from 4 months back, captioned bringing someone very special into the world soon. No father tagged, no details, just soft lighting and a hand on a belly, and, in the comments, 3 separate people from Daniel's family, his mother, his sister, his college roommate turned business partner, dropping heart emojis like it was the most natural thing in the world. I sat with that for a long time. Not the affair. I'd suspected the affair for months in the way you suspect a storm from the pressure change before you ever see clouds. What broke something loose in me wasn't infidelity, it was theft. They had taken my daughter's name and given it to a stranger, and they had done it in secret. and they had planned to celebrate it in a hotel ballroom while telling everyone not to mention it to me, as if I were an inconvenient detail to be managed rather than the mother whose daughter's name they'd just stolen for a party favor. Daniel came down in a t-shirt and sweatpants, toweling his hair, still humming. "You're up late," he said, opening the fridge like it was any other Tuesday. "Work stuff," I said. "Client wants to lock down a trademark before a competitor gets there first." "Sounds thrilling." He grabbed a water and didn't look at me once. "I'm beat. Big week coming up. Anything fun happening?" I asked, and I made my voice light. Made it curious in the way a wife asks about a husband's calendar, and watched something flicker behind his eyes. A half-second of calculation, gone as fast as it came. "Nah," he said. "Just work." I watched him walk up the stairs, and I understood, with a clarity that felt almost peaceful, that the man climbing those steps had no idea what I did for a living. Not really. He knew the job title. He'd never once asked what a trademark actually protects, never asked how a name becomes property, never wondered what it means legally to file paperwork in a dead child's honor. He thought grief had made me soft. He thought 12 years of practicing law had made me predictable, the boss, someone who'd cry, beg, maybe hire a divorce attorney and quietly disappear. He had no idea I already knew exactly how this story was going to end. He just didn't know it yet. To understand why this cut as deep as it did, you have to understand what came before, not the affair, but the 6 years that led up to it, because betrayal doesn't arrive out of nowhere. It arrives at the end of a long, slow erosion, and if you don't know the erosion, you don't know the flood. Daniel and I met at a mutual friend's engagement party, the kind of party where everyone's a little drunk on champagne and possibility. He was charming in the specific way that later, in hindsight, looks less like charm and more like performance. Quick with a joke, generous with compliments, the sort of man who remembers your coffee order after one conversation because it makes you feel seen. I fell for him the way you fall for a good story, quickly and without checking the footnotes. We married 2 years later. At the reception, he stood up with a glass of champagne and talked about wanting a house full of laughter and little feet. And everyone cried, including me, including my mother, who was already sick by then but hadn't told anyone yet. She died 8 months after the wedding. Daniel was good to me through it. Genuinely good. I want to be fair about that, because the story only makes sense if you understand he wasn't always the man in that group chat. He held me through the funeral. He learned to cook the dishes my mother used to make, clumsily, badly, but he tried. For a while, I thought I had married someone who would hold me together no matter what came. Then came Everly. We tried for 3 years before I got pregnant. 3 years of appointments and disappointments and a marriage slowly organizing itself around a single goal, the way a plant grows toward it, the only light in the room. When the 2 lines finally showed up, Daniel cried harder than I'd ever seen him cry. We picked her name on a walk along the lake, Everly, because it means wild boar meadow in some Old English etymology neither of us cared about, but mostly because it sounded like a girl who would grow up strong, and because Daniel said it sounded like someone who'd argue with him about everything, and he wanted that. She was born on a Thursday in March. She lived 11 minutes. The doctors used careful words. Cord accident. Nothing anyone could have done. These things happen, and it is never, ever the mother's fault. And I heard all of it and believed none of it, not for a long time. Daniel disappeared into himself. Not away from me, not at first. Into himself, the way people do when their body doesn't know what to do with pain that big. We didn't talk for weeks except in logistics. The funeral, the headstone, whether we could bear to keep her room. I built the foundation 8 months later. I filed the paperwork myself on a Saturday, alone, because it felt like the only thing I could give her. A name that meant something, that would go on helping other grieving families long after the 2 of us stopped being able to talk about her out loud. Daniel signed where I told him to sign. He didn't ask questions. I don't think he understood, then or ever, exactly what he was signing. That should have told me something. The distance that started after Everly died never fully closed. I told myself it would, that grief has a season and ours would end. Instead, somewhere in the 2nd year, Daniel started coming home smelling like a different cologne than the one I bought him for Christmas. Started taking calls in the garage with the door shut. Started going to a 5 a.m. spin class 3 times a week and coming home looking at me like I was something he'd outgrown. His mother, Carol, noticed my hurt long before I said anything about it, and instead of asking me what was wrong, she started managing me, dropping by with soup I didn't ask for, telling me I looked tired lately, gently suggesting I get back into a hobby, the way you'd redirect a toddler mid-tantrum. I mistook it for love for longer than I should have. Carol had been the only mother figure I had left after my own mother died, and I wanted, badly, to believe that the woman holding my hand at Everly's funeral could not also be the woman helping her son hide an affair. I was wrong. I would learn exactly how wrong on a Tuesday night in a kitchen, from a text message that wasn't meant for me. I didn't confront Daniel that week. I want to be honest about why. It wasn't strategy at first, it was survival. I needed a few days to breathe before I could stand across from him and not fall apart. And I have learned the hard way that the version of me who falls apart in front of her enemies is the version who loses. So instead, I went to work, the actual kind, the kind with billable hours, and I let the part of my brain that never stops running start quietly, methodically, doing what it does best. On Wednesday, during my lunch break, I pulled the incorporation documents for the Everly Grace Foundation. I hadn't looked at them in over a year. Reading them again with new eyes, I felt something click into place with the satisfying finality of a key turning in a lock. When I filed the foundation, I hadn't just registered a nonprofit. I had as part of standard brand protection practice, the same practice I'd recommend to any client building something meant to last, filed for trademark protection on the name Everly Grace in connection with charitable services, and separately, in a fit of grief-fueled thoroughness I barely remembered, registered Everly as a protected mark tied to the foundation's public materials, memorial products, and any commercial use associated with our family name, Whitfield. I had done it to stop scammers from hijacking grief charities, which happens more than people realize. I had done it, if I'm honest, because doing something concrete felt better than doing nothing at all. I had never once imagined I would use it to stop my own husband. But there it was. Legally, Everly, in connection with any public-facing use tied to the Whitfield family name, press materials, branded events, commercial association, belonged in a very real and defensible sense to a foundation I controlled as sole trustee. Daniel's name was on the original filing as a formality, a technicality from when we were still a we. He'd signed it without reading it, the way he signed most things I put in front of him. He had no operational control. He'd never once logged into the foundation's accounts. He probably couldn't have told you what state it was incorporated in. On Thursday, I called my old law school friend Renata, who now ran her own boutique litigation practice, specializing in exactly the kind of nasty, personal, high-stakes disputes that make family law attorneys wince. I didn't tell her everything yet. I told her enough. "Let me get this straight," she said, after I laid it out. "Your husband's mistress named their baby after your dead daughter, and you happen to hold enforceable trademark rights over that exact name in connection with your family's public identity. That's the situation?" "Mara," she let out a low whistle. "That's not karma, that's just good lawyering. I need you to tell me if I'm insane for wanting to use it." "You're not insane," she said. "You're the only sane one in this whole story. The question isn't whether you can use it, it's how loudly you want to." I thought about the group chat. "Please don't mention it to M." "As loudly as legally possible, I said. Over the next 2 weeks, I did something I'd never done before in my marriage. I performed. I let Daniel believe I still didn't know anything. I asked about his day. I made his favorite dinner on a night he came home late and distracted, smelling like that cologne. I even let Carol take me to lunch, sat across from her at a restaurant with white tablecloths, and listened to her tell me in the gentlest voice imaginable that maybe Daniel and I needed some space to figure things out. That she loved us both so much and just wanted everyone to be happy. "You've always been such a rock through everything," she said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "I know things have been hard since Everly. I just want you to know, whatever happens, you'll always be family to me." I smiled at her. I let her believe her performance was landing, the same way she was letting me believe mine was. Inside, I was cataloging everything. The way she said whatever happens like an apology dressed up as comfort. The way her eyes wouldn't quite meet mine when she said family. I paid for lunch, hugged her goodbye, and drove straight to Renata's office with a legal pad full of notes. We built the case like a slow, patient trap, and the deeper we dug, the more the picture assembled itself into something even uglier than betrayal. It assembled itself into fraud. Daniel worked at his family's company, Whitfield Property Partners, a mid-sized real estate development firm his father had built and Carol now chaired since his father's death. Daniel was VP of Business Development, A title that sounded important, and from what Renata's forensic accountant found, once we quietly subpoenaed relevant financial records under the foundation's own legal standing to investigate misuse of its name, mostly meant he approved expense reports and took long lunches. Priya Anand, it turned out, wasn't just a brand consultant. She'd been hired 18 months ago to help rebrand the family company's charitable arm, a small foundation Whitfield Property Partners ran for local housing initiatives, mostly a tax write-off dressed up as community goodwill. Somewhere in the last 6 months, that rebrand had quietly evolved into something much bigger, a plan to fold the Whitfield Company's charitable giving into a shiny new public-facing initiative called the Everly Grace Family Fund, a name deliberately, cynically close to my foundations, designed to leverage the sympathy and goodwill our real charity had built over 2 years, while using my dead daughter's name to launch what was, functionally, a PR-driven slush fund that would let Carol funnel company money toward Priya and the baby without raising questions from the board, the family, or the IRS. They weren't just stealing a name for sentiment. They were stealing it for money, using Everly's memory as camouflage for a financial maneuver. And they were about to launch it publicly, with press, at a naming ceremony where I wasn't supposed to be mentioned, so that by the time I found out, it would already be a beloved, unshakable part of the community narrative. The grieving family turning tragedy into triumph, a story so wholesome no one would ever suspect what was underneath it. They had built their whole redemption arc on my daughter's name. I sat in Renata's office, reading the last of the financial documents, and for the first time since that Tuesday night, I let myself feel the full weight of it. Not the plotting brain version, but the real one. The mother whose daughter's 11 minutes were about to become a marketing strategy. I cried finally the way I hadn't let myself cry in weeks. Renata didn't say anything. She just sat with me until I was done. Then I wiped my face, picked the legal pad back up, and said, "Okay, let's talk about Saturday." The naming ceremony was scheduled for the Ashford Room at the Meridian, a hotel downtown with the kind of chandeliers that exist to be photographed. I found out, through channels I won't detail, that it wasn't just family. There was a local lifestyle magazine sending a photographer. There was a small write-up planned for the company newsletter about the Whitfield family's continued commitment to community and legacy. There was, God help them, a step-and-repeat banner ordered with the words Everly Grace Family Fund printed on it in gold script. They were going to launch their fraud with a photo backdrop. Renata and I spent that week preparing 3 things: a formal cease and desist letter documenting the trademark infringement and demanding immediate cessation of any public use of the Everly Grace name in connection with the Whitfield Property Partners Fund, a private separate letter to the company's board of directors, 5 people, 2 of whom I'd met at holiday parties, all of whom had fiduciary responsibility to know if company charitable funds were being misused for personal purposes, laying out preliminary findings of fund diversion, and because I have never in my life done anything by half measures, a personal statement I intended to read aloud myself in that ballroom in front of everyone, because some kinds of justice don't work if they only happen on paper. Daniel and Carol had no idea any of this was coming. In their minds, I was still the sad, quiet wife they'd need to handle eventually with a clean, generous divorce settlement designed to keep me from making noise. I let them keep believing it. I even let Daniel tell me 4 days before the event that he was going away for the weekend for work, his voice so casual it almost impressed me. "Have a good trip," I told him, and kissed him on the cheek, and felt absolutely nothing. The Ashford Room was exactly as gaudy as I expected. Gold accents, an ice sculpture of a bird that I assume was meant to be a dove, a step-and-repeat banner glowing under too many ring lights, the words Everly Grace Family Fund stretched across the top in a font someone had clearly agonized over. There were maybe 80 people there. Extended family, company employees dressed like they were at a wedding, a photographer from the magazine adjusting her lens near the entrance, Priya, in a soft cream dress, holding a baby wrapped in a blanket monogrammed with a single letter, E. I watched from the hallway for a moment before I walked in, and I let myself feel the full absurdity of it. A room full of people about to applaud a lie built on my daughter's 11 minutes of life, unaware that the woman standing in the doorway held in a leather folder under her arm the paperwork to burn the whole thing down. Daniel saw me first. I watched the color drain out of his face in real time. watched him half rise from his seat, like his body understood the danger before his mind caught up. Carol saw him move and followed his gaze, and her polished, practiced expression cracked for just a second before she smoothed it back into place. "Mara," Daniel said, crossing the room fast, voice pitched low and urgent. "What are you doing here?" "I got an invitation," I said, which was true in a manner of speaking. Renata's investigator had gotten his hands on the guest list a week ago. Am I not welcome at my own daughter's naming ceremony? That landed exactly the way I wanted it to. A ripple went through the nearby guests. A few confused glances. A woman near the buffet table lowering her champagne glass mid-sip. "That's not," Daniel started, but I was already moving past him toward the small podium set up at the front of the room wherein the microphone waited, presumably for Carol's planned remarks about legacy and community and love. "Mara, don't," Carol said, appearing at my elbow with a hand on my arm, her voice a razor blade wrapped in silk. "This isn't the place." "You're right," I said. "It isn't. It's actually a fairly serious legal matter, and I appreciate you gathering everyone in one room to hear about it." I stepped up to the podium. I want to tell you I felt nervous, that my hands shook, that some part of me hesitated at the threshold of doing something this public, this final. I didn't. I felt, for the first time in over a year, completely and perfectly calm. The calm of a person who has done the work, checked the citations, built the case, and knows with total certainty that the facts are on her side. "Hi, everyone," I said into the microphone, and 80 faces turned toward me, half smiling out of social reflex before they understood what was happening. "I'm Mara Whitfield. Some of you know me. For those who don't, I'm Daniel's wife." I let that word sit in the air, wife. Present tense. I want to talk for just a minute about the name on that banner behind me. Everly Grace was my daughter. She was born 6 years ago and lived 11 minutes, and if any of you were at her funeral, you'll remember it because it's the kind of thing you don't forget. 2 years ago, I started a foundation in her name to help other families going through pregnancy and infant loss. I filed the paperwork myself. I hold the trademark on that name in connection with any public, charitable, or commercial use tied to this family. That's not sentiment. That's a legal fact, documented, dated, and enforceable. I watched Daniel's face go the color of the tablecloths. Carol had gone very still. "What's happening today? I continued, is that my husband, his mother, and Ms. Anand." I nodded toward Priya, who was clutching the baby a little tighter now, her face pale. "Have taken that name, my daughter's name, and are launching what the company newsletter is calling the Everly Grace Family Fund, using it to funnel company charitable dollars toward personal expenses while presenting it publicly as a tribute to my daughter's memory. I have documentation, financial records, correspondence. All of it has already been sent to Whitfield Property Partners Board of Directors, along with formal notice of trademark infringement and demand for immediate cessation." A woman near the front, I recognized her later as one of the 2 board members I'd sent letters to, was already pulling out her phone, face tight with the particular fury of someone realizing they'd nearly been made complicit in something ugly. "I want to be very clear," I said, my voice steady, almost gentle, because I had rehearsed this part the most. "This isn't about a custody dispute over a name. This is about my daughter, who does not get the chance to grow up and speak for herself, being used as a prop in someone else's financial scheme. I won't allow that. Not today, not ever." I looked at Priya then, and something in me softened, just slightly, because whatever she was also a woman holding a baby who had nothing to do with any of this. "Your daughter deserves her own name," I told her quietly, but the microphone caught it anyway. "Not mine, not my daughter's, her own." Then I looked at Daniel. "You once told me you wanted a house full of laughter and little feet," I said. "I believed you. I built a life around that promise. What you actually wanted, apparently, was my daughter's memory, repackaged. So your mother could hide money, and you could feel like the good guy in your own story. That's the part I can't forgive. Not the affair, the theft." I stepped back from the podium. Nobody clapped, obviously, so this wasn't that kind of speech. But nobody moved either, 80 people frozen in the particular silence of watching a lie collapse in real time. Daniel opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Carol had her phone out, already typing something, probably to the family attorney, probably too late. I set the leather folder on the podium. Copies of everything, for anyone who wanted them. And I walked out of the Ashford room without looking back, past the ice sculpture of the dove, past the step and repeat banner with my daughter's name on it in gold script that would never be photographed the way they'd planned. Outside in the parking garage, I sat in my car for exactly 4 minutes before I let myself cry. And not the collapsing kind of crying, but the kind that comes after you've carried something heavy for a very long time and finally get to set it down. The fallout moved faster than even Renata predicted. By Monday, Whitfield Property Partners Board had launched a formal internal investigation into the misuse of charitable funds, with 2 board members recusing Carol from any further involvement in financial decision-making pending the outcome. By Wednesday, the company's outside counsel had reached out to Renata directly, eager to settle before this became a story the local business press picked up. Because nothing terrifies a family company more than the words financial impropriety printed next to their name in a headline. Daniel called me 11 times that first week. I answered once on the 4th call, mostly because Renata told me it would look better for the eventual divorce proceedings if I documented that I'd at least given him the chance to speak. "You destroyed everything," he said. "No, hello," voice cracking somewhere between rage and panic. "Do you understand what you did? My mother might lose control of the company. The board is talking about forcing her out." "I understand exactly what I did," I said. "I protected my daughter's name from being used to commit fraud. What I don't understand is how you thought I wouldn't notice, or wouldn't care, or wouldn't be capable of stopping it." "It was never about hurting you," he said, and I almost laughed, because that particular lie is the one every unfaithful husband reaches for eventually, as if intention absolves impact. Priya and I, we didn't plan for this. It happened. And when the baby came, my mom thought using Everly's name would be a way of honoring her, of keeping her memory alive in a good way. And I know that sounds insane now, but at the time, "Daniel," I said, cutting him off, because I could feel myself getting pulled into the old rhythm of explaining his feelings back to him more gently than they deserved, and I had promised myself I was done doing that. "I filed for divorce this morning. Renata will be in touch with your attorney about the terms. Given the financial misconduct documentation, and given that Illinois is an equitable distribution state, I expect this to go quickly and very much in my favor." He was quiet for a long moment. "You planned this," he said finally, and there was something almost like awe under the anger. The particular disbelief of a man realizing he'd underestimated someone for years. "You knew before Saturday. You let it happen." "I let you show everyone exactly who you are," Samantha said, "in front of witnesses, with documentation. That's not a trap, Daniel. That's just what happens when you build something on a lie in a room full of lawyers and cameras." I hung up before he could say anything else. And I meant it when I say I felt lighter, not heavier, in the silence that followed. The divorce took 4 months, which Renata told me was practically a sprint by the standards of cases with this much financial complexity tangled in. The forensic accounting work that had started as ammunition for the confrontation at the Meridian became the backbone of the settlement negotiations, because it turned out Carol's family fund scheme wasn't the only irregularity once auditors started actually looking. There were other soft spots in the company's books, other places where family money had quietly blurred into personal money, other favors extended to people who shouldn't have been on any payroll. None of it was mine to fix. I only ever cared about the piece that touched my daughter's name. But once you pull one loose thread on a sweater like that, the whole thing tends to come apart in the wash, and Whitfield Property Partners spent the better part of a year unraveling in ways that had nothing to do with me anymore. Carol was formally removed from her chair position by a unanimous board vote 6 weeks after the ceremony. Daniel, implicated by association and by his own signature on several of the fund transfer documents, resigned from his VP role rather than be pushed, which everyone in that world understood as a distinction without a difference. Priya, as far as I know, left the company entirely and moved out of state with the baby, whose name I heard through the grapevine of people who still felt obligated to update me on things I no longer needed updates about, was eventually, quietly, legally changed. I don't know what they chose instead. I never asked. It wasn't my business anymore. And more importantly, it wasn't mine to know. That child deserved a name nobody else had a claim to, and I meant what I'd said into that microphone. She deserved her own. The settlement, when it finally came, was generous in the way settlements get generous when one party has significantly more to lose from a drawn-out public fight than the other. I kept the house, I kept my portion of the retirement accounts, doubled by the equitable distribution rules once financial misconduct entered the picture. I didn't ask for spousal support because I didn't want anything from Daniel that required me to stay tethered to him, even administratively, not even by a monthly check. I wanted a clean line. I got one. The Everly Grace Foundation, for its part, came out of the whole ordeal stronger than it had ever been. The story, carefully, deliberately, without ever naming Daniel or Carol directly, because some kinds of dignity are worth preserving, even for people who didn't preserve yours, made its way into a regional piece about a mother, turning grief into advocacy after her foundation's name was nearly co-opted by unrelated corporate interests. Donations tripled in the 2 months after that article ran. I hired a part-time coordinator. We funded 12 families' worth of counseling and medical bills in our second year. Families who'd lost a child the way I lost mine. Families who needed someone to tell them their 11 minutes, their 2 days, their 6 weeks mattered. I go to the cemetery less than I used to, not because I think about Everly less, but because I no longer need a specific place to feel close to her. She's in the paperwork that helps strangers. She's in the name of a foundation that will, God willing, outlive me. She's in the fact that I finally stopped shrinking myself to fit into a marriage that had already decided I was expendable. I saw Carol once more, months later at a grocery store of all places, both of us reaching for the same brand of coffee. She looked older than I remembered, tired in a way that expensive skincare couldn't quite cover. She opened her mouth like she might say something, an apology, an excuse. I'll never know which. And I just shook my head once and let her see in my face that there was nothing left to say. She put her coffee back on the shelf and walked to a different aisle. Daniel, last I heard, took a job at a smaller firm 2 states away. I don't feel triumphant about that exactly. Mostly I just feel like a woman who used to hold her breath around her own husband and doesn't anymore. On what would have been Everly's 7th birthday, I sat on the back porch of the house I now own outright, with a glass of wine and the foundation's quarterly report open on my laptop, and I thought about the version of me who sat frozen at a kitchen island on a Tuesday night, reading a text that wasn't meant for her. I think about how easy it would have been to fall apart instead of building something. I think about how the same skill that let me spend 12 years protecting other people's names and legacies for a living was the exact skill that let me protect the only legacy that ever really mattered to me. I didn't get my daughter back, nothing gets you that, but I got her name back, and this time, no one is ever taking it from me again.